Did you know ignorance hurts more people than any weapon in the world? Did you realize that ignorance is the most dangerous and defining force of human life? That's what we're going to discuss today in this first video on the Plato Project, where I'll be introducing all of Plato, the greatest philosopher of ancient Greece. I'll be teaching all of his works this year, one work or one section a week as part of the Plato Project. And the very first dialogue I'm teaching is about exactly this question, the consequences of ignorance. And this is, in a way, the whole essence of Socrates' life. Socrates died. He was executed by the state of Athens 4 centuries before our common era, before the life of Jesus of Nazareth. And he was executed for the charge of impiety. And if you've never heard the word piety or impiety, this has to do with basically the deepest kind of justice that many cultures throughout history have thought was the most important form of ethical and right behavior. How do you deal with the gods? And you could say, well, I don't believe in the gods. That's fine. 99% of all humans throughout all of history have. And even if you don't personally believe in the gods have represented for humans the idea of ultimate reality, that which defines us, which gives birth to us, to which we have some standing, powerful obligation. So if you believe in science, or if you believe in justice, then science or justice can play a role very similar to the role of the gods in the ancient world. And Euthyphro is the character that this dialogue is named after, and he's a religious expert who thinks he knows everything about the gods of ancient Greece. And based on his knowledge, based on his expertise about the gods, he does something, or he's trying to do something that seems like a really bad thing. And Socrates very politely and gently tries to ask him questions about this, because guess what? Socrates himself is about to go on trial within a week of the time he meets Euthyphro for his own charge against impiety. And so he tells Euthyphro, he's like, oh, if you know what piety is, why don't you teach me? And then I can tell it to the people who are trying to convict me and I'll survive. Now, it turns out Socrates was convicted for impiety and he died by hemlock poisoning as a result. And he's the most famous philosopher in the history of the West because of his witness to philosophy. And what made Socrates so powerful is that he was constantly asking questions, and he was constantly, as a result, pursuing an understanding of his own ignorance. And for Socrates, wisdom has to do with understanding your own ignorance. So the consequences of ignorance are the central theme, I think, of this dialogue, and also the difficulty of truly knowing. So what is this dialogue about, the Euthyphro? The central question of the dialogue is, as I said, what is piety? So let's just say, what is piety? Well, of course, that's the key question. But broadly speaking, piety has to do with the way in which you respect your parents, your ancestors, nature, the world around you. In a way, it's quite synonymous or closely related to justice, the idea of goodness. So today, even though we don't use the word piety a lot, when you see people disagree with other people and actually condemn them because they think they're acting in a way that is indecent or evil, then they're essentially accusing them of a kind of injustice, or in this ancient way of thinking, of impiety. So it really matters, like, what do we think piety is? What is the right way to live in relationship to the earth, in relationship to yourself, in relationship to the God or the gods, if you believe in them, or in relationship to like the ultimate values that you think humans should pursue? How do we know what the right thing to do is? That's in a deep sense what this dialogue is about. And the core idea is that if you do something to another person based on your idea of knowing that you have the truth about what's right and wrong, and you're wrong, that's a very serious consequence. And Euthyphro is someone who's so confident that he knows what piety is, he's going to do something that in the ancient world was just thought of as terrible, which is he was going to bring up his father on charges of murder for something that is not even legally clear in any legal system would be a fair charge. And for a son to bring this charge against his father in the ancient Greek world, or in many traditional cultures today, was considered just crazy and terrible. So Socrates wants to know what is piety. And the consequence of the conversation is he exposes Euthyphro's ignorance. and he develops one of the most famous set of arguments in human history. So I want to break down to you the major big idea of this dialogue, which is, in order to know what something is, you have to know what the form of it is. This is Socrates' key claim. You'll see it written down below in the description for this video. You'll see the quote where Socrates wants Euthyphro to tell him what makes everything pious that's pious. And this universalizes what makes everything just that is just, what makes everything good that is good. And Socrates is looking for that kind of explanation. Turns out it's very hard to give that kind of explanation. So what Euthyphro does is he gives a number of explanations. Socrates interrogates them, he explores them, and none of them end up holding water. So what are we supposed to do? Euthyphro never admits that he's wrong, no matter how many times he is shown that he is ignorant, no matter how many times his own definition of piety fails to satisfy logic and sense. He never admits that the problem is with his own understanding of piety. He always actually blames Socrates. And so one of the most amazing things literarily about the Euthyphro is that it is a kind of meta story about what happens to Socrates. In the next dialogue, Plato's Apology, very famous text, which is the speech Socrates gave before the jury of Athens before he was convicted to defend himself in court, this is the dialogue. And so in the context of Socrates' own accusation against him of impiety, we see that Euthyphro embodies exactly what the Athenian state embodied when they condemned, as a majority of Athenian men, they condemned Socrates to death. Was it because they knew what impiety was? No. It was because they were prejudiced. They were prejudiced against Socrates from very early on because there were stereotypes and slander about him, and people were not concerned to know the truth. And so based on ignorance, they killed the most famous sort of, and in a way very righteous, good human being in their society at the time. And that human being, Socrates, has changed the world for 2,400 years. He has shaped human history in an extraordinary way. And in this week or two leading up to his death, in this dialogue, which is a dramatic literary presentation, but it is connected to real events, Socrates is trying to show us people will often confidently say, I know what justice is, and then they'll condemn other people. They will say, you're evil, you're wicked, because you don't agree with me, and the reason that's bad is not because you don't agree with me, but they'll think it's because I know what's right and wrong. Now, Socrates agrees we should know what's right and wrong. We have to know what a good life is, otherwise we won't live a good life. But what Socrates challenged was that it's easy to know what's good. It actually requires a great deal of work, and that kind of work is exactly what happens in the dialogue. As part of the Plato Project, which I'm launching with this video, we're going to read through, everyone interested in the entire world, we're going to read through all of Plato's works in a year. All of these in this text published by Hackett, and I'm going to reach out to Hackett to see if I can get a special rate for people who want to buy this directly from them. So stay tuned for that. And if you're interested in getting all the updates about the Plato Project and my notes, all of it for free, you can just subscribe to my Substack, which is linked below. And then if you're interested in studying the Plato text with me, you can come to a weekly class. So we're going to be talking about the Euthyphro, the Apology. Every week we'll talk about Plato. And once a month there'll be a free class anyone can join, which will be an Ask Me Anything and AMA. So if you're interested in Plato, I'm glad you're listening. And please do join the Plato Project, which you're already part of now by being interested. Now let me get back to the Euthyphro. So what's the real consequence or danger of judgment without knowledge? The danger is you cause extreme harm. And so this is something that is a very profound idea today. In the media, social media, popular media, politics, it's very common for people to confidently accuse other people of being bad. And Socrates is not arguing that there is no good or evil, quite the opposite. But Socrates and the tradition of philosophy that Plato embodies in his text is very careful, and the philosopher is not like a normal, say, person, in the sense that a normal person just thinks they know whatever they think they know and they don't think about it. But that's not really rational. It doesn't make sense, does it? So what happens if you ask yourself, why do I think I know this? Take anything you think you know and ask yourself, if Socrates asked you, what is this thing you think you know? Do you know the answer? Is it a good answer? And we are very uncomfortable with that. We would tend to rather harm, sadly, another person by not admitting our ignorance than admitting our ignorance. And so philosophy is fundamentally a moral practice. Not that the people who do it are necessarily, especially moral or anything. It's rather that, for example, for me as a philosopher, I practice philosophy. I'm an academic. I'm a scholar. I did my Ph.D. at Yale. I'm an editor. I'm writing a book about this stuff, but that's not the primary thing that makes me a philosopher. The primary thing that makes me a philosopher is that I know I'm ignorant and I've got to practice overcoming ignorance. Knowledge is a very hard thing to acquire. So Euthryphro thinks he knows what piety is. He's going to go condemn his own father in a very dubious case, which is not supported at all, the accusation he's making. And you know why he wants to condemn his father? This is critical because there's stories about the gods in ancient Greece in which a person like Zeus, the head of the gods of the Greek world at the time, there's famous stories about Zeus assaulting his own father because he was a kind of wicked figure in the mythologies of Greece and even castrating him. And so Euthyphro literally appeals to the myths of the Greek culture and its stories about the gods, and he uses this as a precedent for his own behavior, which would be universally seen, as it was by Socrates, as very immoral, not at all pious behavior. But Euthyphro thinks he's such an expert in knowing what's right and wrong, and he's such an expert in piety that he can justify his actions. And the way he does it is he cites stories of the way the gods behave. And Socrates' response is, do you really believe those stories literally are true about the gods, that they disagreed with each other, that they hated each other, that they attacked each other? And Euthyphro says he does. And guess what? It's really convenient. If the gods are in disagreement and can condemn each other, then you can always cite some divinity as an excuse for what you're doing. So many people think this is a general critique of religion, and there is a general critique of certain forms of religion inside of this, but Socrates, remember, is not actually impious. Socrates was a very righteous, holy person by the standards of Athenian culture. We can get into that, and I'm going to discuss it more in the course on the Euthyphro, and these texts that we'll be discussing this week. We'll discuss the Apology as well. But the important thing is that the role of stories as justifications for immoral behavior, that's the important concept, is that we justify our behavior by stories or by precedents of things. And if you have bad stories, or stories that depict bad behavior, then it sets a bad example. And so whether you believe in gods or not, almost everyone exists in a moral or ethical framework in which they justify what they do by reference to some kind of example. Well, the president is doing it. The senator is doing it. My favorite literary character is doing it. My favorite movie character is doing it. And whether we believe or think carefully about the way this works, we're affected by examples. The philosopher René Girard coined the idea of a mimetic triangle. Mimesis is a word used in Plato from Greek. It has the idea of imitation or copying. And so the idea of the mimetic triangle is that human desire is influenced by the desire of other people. So let's say, for example, your best friend who you really look up to, they want to study Plato and they're excited about the Plato Project. So you weren't aware of the Plato Project, and maybe this is you now, and you then, because you like your friend, you get interested in Plato. That's an example of mimetic desire, that we want the things we want because other people want them, that we admire. This is how marketing works. You see a celebrity, they're associated with Gucci or Armani or some brand, and then you think, okay, that celebrity wants to be associated with that brand. I like that celebrity, so I like that brand. And none of this happens consciously. René Girard's point is this is just how desire works. And Plato would agree. So people will often think that they're freeing themselves from the influence of the crowd, but often what they're doing is they're copying someone else. For example, a lot of right-wing philosophy bros, no judgment per se, like Euthyphro is a type of religious philosophy bro. A lot of right-wing philosophy bros today will cite Nietzsche as the precedent for their own refusal to abide by certain, say, customary norms of politeness or civility. And whether that's fair or not, whether that accurately reflects Nietzsche, it's using another example, in this case, the influence of Nietzsche as a model to justify a way of behaving, a way of thinking, acting, and desiring that seems to be separate from the crowd, but it's still actually based on a mimetic exemplar or a person like Nietzsche who's very influential and powerful, who influences what you think is good or right to do. And so the logic of the Euthyphro is very deep, and we could discuss it in many layers, but this core idea is most of how we judge the world and judge ourselves is based on stories, examples of people or gods or myths or characters that have shaped us, often unconsciously. And we think, well, if they did that, I would like to do that, or I can do that, or I am permitted to do that. And the deep question this dialogue is raising is, can you actually justify your judgments? If you were brought to court to be in front of a jury to explain simply what you believe about an idea, what is justice, what is goodness, could we give an account? I mean, I can tell you after over 20 years of studying and practicing philosophy, it's very difficult. And that has not discouraged me at all. I believe there are true values. I think it's really important. I believe in the value of becoming human. That's my whole work, the Becoming Human Project. But the Euthyphro is a beautifully powerful illustration of how difficult it is to actually effectively answer the question, what is X? What is justice? What is piety? And so what it teaches us at the simplest and deepest level is humility. It also teaches us that many people will judge another person, but they will not admit their own ignorance. And that's how you know that you're not yet, or that person hasn't yet started living the philosophical life. The philosophical life is a revolutionary way of life that I believe every human being is meant to adopt, because every human being, I think, is meant to live a good life. And I think every human being wants to live a good life. And to live a good life, you have to actually know what a good life is. And in order to know what a good life is, you have to know what things are in the first place. You have to know what goodness is. And we can be confused about those things. There's a lot of people who want to tell us something is good that isn't good. We all want to eat healthily. It's confusing. Who do you listen to? So Euthyphro cites the examples of the divine experts of Greece, the gods, but the divine experts disagree. And so as I show in my work, and we'll discuss in the course for those of you who are going to join me, and I write about this in my book, what happens when the gods disagree? It's exactly the same situation as I have argued in the book I'm writing for Columbia University Press. It's the exact same situation as disagreement amongst experts. So you don't have to believe in the gods to read the Euthyphro and recognize behind the issue of ignorance lies the abuse of expertise. Experts are so important. But often people abuse expertise, and we don't know what to do. What do you do when experts conflict? What do you do when the authorities conflict? And the answer is you have to figure things out. You have to figure out what is the scientific approach to this. And Socrates in the Euthyphro is really giving you a taste of what it's like to practice science as a way of life, which is what my work is about. In my book, I argue that science and religion are deeply connected, and that actually learning to practice science as a way of life is something available to everyone. And if you're interested in that, please do follow the Becoming Human Project and learn more about my work. And stay tuned in the Plato Project, because we're going to discuss this a lot. Living philosophically is, in a sense, learning to live scientifically. You learn to actually be okay with being ignorant and to pursue knowledge, which you can't pursue if you think you already have it. So Euthyphro has a conversation with Socrates. He keeps trying to answer the question, what is piety? And at the end of the day, he doesn't have a good answer. And Socrates tries to get him to give a good answer. And you know what he says? Socrates says, so tell me, my good Euthyphro, and do not hide what you think piety is. And Euthyphro just says, some other time, Socrates, for I'm in a hurry now, and it's time for me to go. How often is it that that's what happens? You ask a person a hard question, they try to answer, you ask again. Finally, they don't just say, you know what, I don't know. I actually thought I knew what I was talking about, but I don't. Socrates says this all the time. If you're an honest philosopher, you're going to often think, let me figure out if I know anything about this. You think through it, you talk through it with a friend or a teacher, a student, a fellow philosopher. You find out you don't know. That's okay. Philosophy, Socrates and Plato taught, begins in ignorance. It begins in pathlessness, when you've lost the way. So the Plato Project is about bringing the great insights of Socrates and of Plato to the entire world. Everyone can read. You can read just 30 pages of Plato a week, basically, and you can read more Plato than most Ph.Ds have ever read, and it'll change your life, because every Platonic text has a deep source of wisdom in it. They're great literature, they're great ideas, and they're a great way to get an education, because Plato has influenced everything about our culture. So I'm going to be talking more about the Plato Project. I'm going to be bringing you great scholars. Gregory Shaw, one of the world's leading scholars in the Platonic tradition. I'll be talking to him this week and bringing you that interview soon. Armand Angor, professor of classics at Oxford University. He wrote a beautiful book on Socrates I reviewed at the Marginalia Review of Books. I'm going to interview him about Socrates. I'm going to interview all the Plato experts, all the experts in the history of the Platonic tradition. I'm going to bring them to you for free and share the love of wisdom, which is what I'm here to do. That's what philosophy is about. It's not about being better than other people. Often it's the opposite. It's about realizing we're not as good as we thought, and we're going to have to practice. We're going to have to learn what justice is to become more just. We're going to have to practice what piety is, practice how to study, and the Euthyphro is a great place to start that. I hope you'll join me. You can find the information, like I said, linked below. Join the Plato Project. You can sign up Substack for free. Get a paid membership. It's only $10 a month, and you can come to my courses every week. I'm Samuel Loncar, the founder and creator of the Becoming Human Project and the Plato Project, the Plato Parsha Project, where we read a parsha or a portion of Plato every week, starting this week with our discussion of the Euthyphro. Thanks so much for joining me. May your life be filled with wisdom, beauty, and goodness.